So good afternoon, I'm Bob Jones with the National Hope Movement, and I welcome you to today's webinar, Taming Anxiety Gremlins, helping kids and teens become anxiety masters. And it's so good to be joined by Dr. Carolyn Buzanko. Dr. Buzanko is a registered psychologist and an anxiety specialist. She's worked for 20 years with children, teens, and adults. And as you may be aware, anxiety is at epidemic levels amongst children and teens. It's the most common mental health concern that they face. And Dr. Buzanko is going to give us some insight into why some traditional ways of helping children and teens may actually unwittingly worsen their anxiety. And then she's going to share with us 8 essential steps in helping children manage anxiety effectively. Before we introduce Dr. Carolyn, there's a couple of housekeeping items here. First of all, the event is being hosted by the National Hope Movement. We are a movement that inspires hope in the fight for mental health. And we're glad you've joined us today because we hope that you will join that movement. We create a platform where every story is told, every voice is heard, and every person is empowered. And through this workshop, we aim to give you tools of hope, empowering you to achieve or help others to achieve mental well-being. Today's event is being recorded. It's going to be posted publicly on our YouTube page. So we do invite you to please turn off your camera as you wish, and also to mute your mic just to honor Dr. Buzanko as she shares today. And we'll give you information on how to connect with us at the tail end of this presentation today. And if you have any questions, please just post them in the chat area. If you're new to Zoom, you can access the chat area at the bottom of your Zoom screen under chat and just post your question. I'll be monitoring that chat area. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A with Dr. Buzanko. And right now, it's my pleasure to be able to turn this workshop over to Dr. Carolyn Buzanko. Thank you so much for joining us today. Over to you, Dr. Buzanko.
Thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate it. And thank you all for joining me today. I'm very excited to be here because anxiety is a very important topic. Like Bob was saying, it is at epidemic levels and it's only skyrocketed since COVID. And with the new school closures where I am, we're going to see it on the rise again a little bit more. So I've got a lot to go through. There are 8 pieces of the compass. I'm going to do my very best to go through all of them, but it's kind of fast and furious. So I'm really focusing on the most important pieces, at least giving you things to start thinking about, just so that you understand, how are we responding to our kids? Now, I am a psychologist. I've had lots of research experience and clinical experience, but something that you should know is I'm also a mom, and a mom of two girls who also have anxiety. And so I understand from a parenting perspective, as well as the professional perspective, on what anxiety looks like and how hard it can be sometimes, especially when our kids are putting up big fights just to get out the door or to do their math homework or whatever else is going on for them. So I do understand, and that's why I try to break things down as practical as possible, which is why I made this compass. Now, just so we know, looking at how important anxiety is, it's really the most common mental health concern for all of our kiddos in grade school, from kindergarten to grade 12. And it's not something that they outgrow. And that's really important because a lot of my parents, I see teens later on and they're like, I just thought they were going to grow out of it. I thought it was just a phase, but anxiety is not something we outgrow. And unfortunately, a lot of our kiddos, they don't get the treatment that they need at all. And if they do get treatment, sometimes it's not the right kind of treatment. The reason this is important is because if they aren't getting that support early on and the anxiety is not being targeted early on, anxiety in kids and teens is the leading predictor for later difficulties in life. And once it gets into adulthood, adults have a harder time being able to manage that anxiety and overcome it. And then that usually turns into depression as well. So that's why early intervention is so critical. And why I developed this compass and wanted to be able to share it as much as I can. So let's jump into what anxiety is. We do have this pre-built system, and it's that fight, flight, or freeze, right? When there's danger, it's there to protect us. But when we're looking at a really simplified view over here, this is the amygdala. That's kind of what processes. I think you can see my mouse. I don't know, maybe I'm just pointing. Can you see my mouse? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So that's our amygdala. That's where it processes scary things. It's kind of on the alert, lookout for anything that could be really dangerous, for example. And what ends up happening, we see something dangerous that registers to our amygdala that sets off these alarms. And then it tells our adrenal glands, which are above our kidneys, just on our back, we've got these adrenal glands that send out some chemicals into the body to allow us to be able to run or fight or whatever it is within, that we're facing, whatever danger that is. So what we need to remember is this is a pre-built system that we've had for over 10,000 years in our brain. We can't just get rid of it. Anxiety is normal. Worries are normal. We can't get rid of it. And I think that that's really important to remember, because being human means we're going to feel worries at least some parts of our life. It's normal. It protects us from danger, right? And as a bonus, that anxiety can actually help us do our best when we're in the face of a challenge, because it's revving up our system. It's revving up our bodies to be able to put forth the energy that we need to be able to do a presentation like this, or whatever it is that we have to do in our own lives. So it's important to know all of those feelings that we have. And a lot of kiddos have big feelings, whether they feel like they're going to throw up, or they can't breathe, or they can't swallow. It's not dangerous. And oftentimes it's just those feelings that kiddos have, or young adults as well, right? But we start feeling that, and then we start becoming anxious about feeling that way. But it's not dangerous. It's there to protect us. It wouldn't make sense that we're having a heart attack if our body's actually trying to protect us. So, when we're looking at normal worries, they're to be expected. We do need to remember that they're temporary and they're not affecting how we're functioning. It's not getting in the way of us going to school or going to sleepovers or doing what else it is that we need to do. Kids still go on with life. We know worries are normal when there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. But when anxiety starts to become a problem, there really is no end. And so we can start looking at, it's interfering with just everyday life, right? It's interfering with their ability to make decisions or follow through with normal childhood activities. And we're seeing that a lot of these kiddos, if it's an anxiety disorder versus normal worries, is just creating a lot more distress for them than other kiddos. So the problem with anxiety is that we've got this overactive amygdala. And so it's setting off alarms all the time. And it starts to become a problem because kids are just flooded with uncomfortable feelings, even though there are no saber-toothed tigers anymore, right? They're having scary thoughts, intrusive thoughts. They're wanting to avoid things. And here's the thing, our brain can't tell the difference if there's a real threat. So when I go hiking, I'm terrified of cougars. So whether I actually see a cougar or just think of a cougar, my brain cannot tell the difference. And so my body is going to react the exact same way. So just expecting something bad to happen is enough to set off that alarm in the brain. And then once that brain is triggered, we have no rational thought. So when we're telling our kids, it's okay, just calm down, it's not helping, because our brain is flooded. All of the blood is rushed from our thinking rational brain to our motor cortex to get us to ready, to fight or to run away. So really our kids, they're just stressing themselves out with their own thoughts. And so it's really hard to be able to manage, especially in the moment. Really, when we're looking at anxiety, it's us getting overwhelmed with stress. This is too much. I can't handle it anymore. That's essentially what anxiety is. I'm overwhelmed and I can't handle it. But there is a silver lining. Even though anxiety is on the rise, it is the most treatable disorder. We just need to know how, which is why I'm so happy that you're able to join me today. Knowing where anxiety comes from isn't really helpful. So just stop asking why and just stop trying to figure it out, because it doesn't really help. And we just get caught into an anxiety trap. But we're just all predisposed to anxiety. We are descendants of anxious people. I think that should be good enough. But we do need to consider the not so much the nature debate, the nurture debate, right? It's not knowing where anxiety came from. It's knowing how anxiety is maintained, how we might be making our kids' anxiety worse or contributing to it or just maintaining it as it is. That's what's more important. So I'm going to talk about some of those traps, but I usually give some fun facts here. By the time they're 11, kids have usually seen over 8,000 murders, 100,000 other acts of violence just on television. So we got to start considering, what is it that our kids are taking in? And especially this day and age, I mean, my kids knew everything that was happening on Capitol Hill with all the riots and well, everything going through the elections. And even with COVID, knowing what's happening around the world. I mean, back in the good old days when there were no TVs and very limited communication, you never knew what was happening from one part of the world, heck, one village to the next, unless someone was running from one village to say, oh my goodness, this is what's happening. But now kids are bombarded with incoming news all the time. Parents are talking about it. They're talking about it in class. They're seeing it on the news. And they have a really hard time. I mean, rationally, they might be able to say, okay, that's happening over on that side of the world, but they're having a really hard time actually separating that. And we start seeing a lot more anxiety about things like weather, tsunamis happening in Calgary, not going to happen, but it's really hard for them to be able to tell that difference. So that's a huge piece of this puzzle. But there's a lot of adult traps that we do, whether we're parents or teachers and even other clinicians sometimes if we don't really know what we're doing. So one major trap is modeling our own anxious behavior because our kids learned through us. And I think that's really important. How are we modeling anxiety? This is probably my biggest trap. If you're a great parent like me, I love pulling practical jokes. I do it all the time and I try not to. That's where my ADHD kicks in and I'm just not thinking of the consequences, but I love terrifying my children. It's funny. Until I realize, oh my gosh, they've got anxiety disorders now because of all my pranks that I've been doing and they can't trust me, right? Because I'm always joking. So that's one way that we can start instilling some of this anxiety. We use catastrophic language. So for example, we might say, hey kiddo, make sure you lock the door behind me and don't open it up. That's all we need to say. But then we add in, because someone might break in and steal all our stuff or snatch you up, right? We add that language. Or, hey, kiddo, make sure you put your seatbelt on. That's all you need to say. But then we say, because if we get into an accident, you're going to smash through the window and, have brain damage or something like that. We just got to think about all our little, you're a little bit too high, but come down. Oh, you're going too fast. All of our little eeks, oohs, ahs, that can contribute to anxiety as well. No is one of the most dangerous words in our language because it creates a lot of stress in our kids' brains, but also our own brains. And so it's stressing everybody else, everybody out. So the cortisol and our brain starts, ringing that trigger. Sometimes we're too strict. We have too many expectations, whether it's academics or chores. I have a lot of kids who feel like they're gophers because we're like, telling our kids, hey, bud, can you go grab my phone, go grab my cable, can you go go upstairs and do this for me and go get the dog or whatever it is. We're asking them to do stuff and they feel like gophers all the time and they just feel like there's so much pressure. I'm not even getting into all the stress that our kids and teens feel because it is a lot more than what we would have experienced as kids, but those little pieces just add on to it. Or we're always praising our kids for when they get 100% or when they win the game, right? That's where we're giving them all of our praise. So then they're learning, I only really get this praise when I'm the best. And then they feel like they have to have these really high expectations. Or we soften the blow if they've lost a game. Oh, kiddo, the goalie was just off the game today. It wasn't your fault. You played fantastic. No, you're part of a team. Everybody has a role. What could have you done better, right? So it's not that we're breaking our kids down and said, you had a terrible game. It's like, how did your team play together? What was your role in that? What can we work on for next time, right? Otherwise, they're going to always feel like I can never lose. Rushing in the morning, with COVID, maybe that's the silver lining. Maybe we don't have to rush so much, but rushing, it's super anxiety provoking. That sends off all of these alarms. And for our kids, if they're feeling rushed and they got to get out the door, if that alarm system has rung, they're sitting down at the desk, they're not going to be able to take in anything. They're going to have a really hard time learning anything. And so we just got to think about how are we sending our kids off to school, which is really stress provoking anyways for a lot of our kids, or we push them. I remember going to one of those Gymboree classes when my daughter was a baby with Jimbo the Clown, which was really creepy in and of itself, but they had this parachute, right? And I remember one of the little kids, he must have been maybe 18 months old or something, maybe 2 at the most, who was terrified to go under this parachute. But the mom pushed him and was like, it's going to be so much fun. It's going to be the best thing ever. We think that our kids are going to have so much fun and we push them when they're not ready and they don't have the skills. Or we talk about it. A lot of our kids, I remember even my daughter, when she first started junior high, didn't know anybody. And so she'd go to the bathroom at lunchtime and just kind of hide away. So then I start getting anxious. And then I start asking her leading questions like, who did you hang out with today? Who did you see at lunch? What did you do at lunch? Where did you go at lunch? So that's starting to create a lot of anxiety. Or we're answering their questions. They're asking us, what if, who's going to be there? What time are you going to be home? Ba, 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 ba. The more we talk about it, the more we're doing anxiety, because that's what anxiety wants. It wants certainty and it wants comfort. And so if we're talking about it, we're giving it a lot of attention, and see, it is a big deal. So obviously I do have something to worry about. Or we tell them, it's okay, kiddo. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. That's not helpful either. Or we say there's no such thing as monsters, but it's real for them. The brain can't tell the difference. So they might go to bed, but it's not going to make the fear go away. The fear is still there. And now they feel like a big baby because they're scared of the dark and need a nightlight, right? And then they also feel like we're not even listening to them. We don't really want to take them seriously. We don't really understand them. So they're going to go underground with their fears. And usually it comes out, as anger and oppositional and avoidance sort of behaviors. And we have to remember, when that alarm goes, like I said, all the blood rushes out of our prefrontal cortex, our thinking, rational part of our brain, into our motor cortex. So there's no rational thinking going on in those moments anyway. It's literally going in one ear and out the other ear. Asking the why questions, that's not helpful, knowing where it came from. Any talking that we do about anxiety with our kiddos, we're getting sucked into it. And there's this reverse hypnosis where we are now helping anxiety to protect or to make our kids feel better. Actually, one of the rules that I've been saying to parents lately is anything you do to make your kids feel better is worsening anxiety. And I think that's really a big sort of sum up here. Talking about genetics, blaming it on genetics. Oh, they come by it honestly. I was anxious. Grandma was anxious. It's in our genes. That's really damaging, because then kids think it's permanent. And then there's a hopelessness, helplessness that there's nothing I can do to change it. And there is. So we don't want to do that either. We bubble wrap our kids. We've got these helicopter parents, but we also have these lawnmower parents where we're actually creating a really smooth path for them. But it suffocates resilience. It spikes anxiety. It just makes everything worse when we're doing everything for our kids to make them feel comfortable. Resilience is all about experiencing adversity and stress. We want our kids to be resilient and figure things out on their own. I know that, parenting is really hard. And this is true for teachers. We do accommodations in the classroom as well, but that's not going to be helpful. Anything we do to help our kids feel better is just going to make it worse. It's not to make you feel guilty. It's just start to think about, what is it that I'm doing that's sort of enabling that anxiety? So if we say, hey, kiddo, let me look over your homework. I'll make you feel better. I'll look over it before you hand it in. Or you know what? Let me go talk to the teacher. You're having some social problems or you're having troubles with school. Let me go talk to the teacher. I'll take care of it for you. Or you don't want to take the bus, kiddo, you know what? I'll just drive you. It's okay. Or you're going to go to sleepover. Dude, you know what? You can call me anytime. I will come in 3 o'clock in the morning and pick you up. Anytime we jump in and do these things and save our kids, we're telling them, A, see, it is a big deal, and B, you can't handle it. That's the message that we're sending them, that you can't handle it. We're reinforcing that. But guess what? They already feel like they can't handle it. And so that's why that can be a really real problem. And when we start jumping in, we start creating this dependency. And we're robbing our kids. It's critical developmental opportunities to be faced with adversity, to be faced with something uncomfortable, to be faced with something that we're nervous. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. Maybe people are going to laugh at us, right? And so kids are never going to take challenges. They're always going to take the easy way. So the other thing that we need to know is, and this is probably the buying point for parents when I eventually get to the point, that we are actually changing their brain development. We are hindering their brain development when we are always jumping in for them. They can't make those problem-solving connections in their brain if we are jumping in. Even things like, I will give kiddos, when I first meet with them, a riddle to solve. And then parents are automatically, because it's a hard riddle. And I'm like, you got to figure this out on your own. But parents are trying to coach, think about this. And what about this? And what are some other questions? I'm like, no comments from the peanut gallery. Shut your traps. Because we don't want to see our kids struggling, right? We don't want them to get frustrated. We want to help them. But if we're always giving them little hints and tips, they're never going to figure it out for themselves. And if they do take any of our advice for whatever it is, it's with a big eye roll. It's usually just to get us off their backs rather than actually taking in something to learn whatever the opportunity is, you know? So if they take their jacket outside because it's cold, it's just to get you to stop nagging, not for them to actually think, oh, mom was right. It actually is cold. I should have my jacket. They'll never admit that you were right? It'll always be that you were just being annoying. I'm getting you off my back and I'm fine. I would have been warm without it anyways. So they're not actually making those connections and having those learnings on their own. And we're actually making kids more vulnerable because they aren't having opportunities to experience that I can handle this, right? I know how to cope. What if I can't get a hold of mom? You know what? I've done this before. I can do it again. So we're just really stunting resilience. So that parent trap is huge. And I would spend a lot of time just on that. And that's why I did spend so much time on that, because we can start looking at what are we doing that's making it worse. If you can change how you respond, that's going to be a big piece of this whole compass, is just looking at that. So these are the 8 stages, and I'm going to go through most of them, except in unwind. I'm not going to talk too much about, but I will be talking a little bit briefly about others. I mean, I could spend 5 to 10 hours on each part of the compass. So when addressing anxiety, it's not a kid thing. It's a family thing or a classroom thing, right? We're never focusing just on the kiddo, because how we respond makes all the difference, which I will be talking about. So the first is understanding, and understanding anxiety, understanding the parent traps that we fall into, and understanding how it shows up. So I'm just going to quickly talk about how it shows up. First, it manifests through our affect. So that's our emotions, but also the physical symptoms. Because all of those chemicals are going through our body, of course we feel sick, or butterflies in our tummy. Of course we feel headachy. Of course our body's feeling achy. Of course our heart, is beating fast, or we feel like we can't breathe, because that's what's happening. So understanding for ourselves, but also kids, to learn what's happening in their body. Anxiety also shows up through their thoughts, the what if thinking, worst case scenarios, right? Mom and dad are late. So they must have been in a car accident. Something bad must have happened. I can't handle it. And oftentimes that anxiety leads to behaviors, whether it's internalizing behaviors, and that's usually where they're more withdrawn, they're really clingy, or the acting out. And I see a lot of ODD kids. It's not oppositional defiance, is they're protecting themselves. They're defending themselves because there's an underlying anger is secondary to fear. Let's just put it that way. They are fearful for something, whatever that is, whether it's to be humiliated, they don't want to be humiliated, or, shown up one, or anything like that. So that's where we see a lot of these behaviors. So I think it's really important for us to consider those kinds of things. Obviously, there's a lot more to know about anxiety, but it's just to start thinking, how does it show up for my kiddo? What does it feel like in the body? What does it sound like through the stories that it tells, which I will be talking a little bit more about? And then how do we see it behaviorally? And it could be avoidance or anything else. Connection is so, so important. I mean, I could spend 12 hours just on talking about this. Like I said, how you respond makes all the difference. And that's where the first step of any intervention that I do is always with parents, and how they are showing up and responding, so they're not falling into the parent traps. The most important connection that we can have with our kiddos is to be an effective emotion coach. So it's just like, when we got to think about it, when kids learn an instrument or sport, we, as their teacher or coach, we don't go up on the stage and perform for them. We don't go out on the field and perform for them. They got to do it themselves. Right. And so that's where we're getting to. We are coaching our kids. We are consultants. It's up to them. They're the CEO of this whole, business. It's up to them if they're going to pick up what we're consulting on. Right. We can give them hints and tips and suggestions if they take it up, but they're not going to take up anything we give them if we don't have a good connection. And so that's why this is such an important piece. Now, showing confidence, there's these mirror neurons in our brain. If we're showing confidence, they're going to feel that confidence. So if they're climbing a tree and we're like, they're probably going to freak out and slip and fall and hurt themselves and now be scared, right? But if we're, even if inside we're like, oh, if we can be like, hey, dude, you did amazing, right? Showing that confidence, they're going to feel that as well. So that's a huge piece in how we're reacting. But the whole point, if you take, there's a couple of key pieces. If you take one away, this is going to be really important, where we just sit with them. As adults, we feel like we need to fix things. We need to jump in and solve things. We need to make them feel better. Again, if you're making them feel better, it's not going to be actually very helpful. So it's giving them a shoulder to cry on, so to speak. We're being empathetic, right? We're like, oh, kiddo, man, that sucks, right? I can't believe that happened today. Or, yeah, I can see why you're worried about that for tomorrow. Not then jumping in with, well, why don't you do this and I can call your teacher. Forget about that. Just be with them. Just create that space where they can share how they're feeling, right? Without trying to reassure them or tell them that they're wrong, or without telling them, that they have to, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. Just being able to validate. There are steps to being an effective emotion coach, but that's the first best thing that you could do, is just give them that space and show some empathy. I know that this is fast and furious. But I'm trying to give you little bits and pieces here. Inspire is going to be really important as well, because we need to get their buy-in. As we move through the compass, it gets a little bit tricky. But I do see a lot of kids who resist working on anxiety because it's going to be really scary. So we got to make sure, because the work that we're going to do is going to make them feel uncomfortable. It is going to make them anxious, right? It is going to make them, maybe I have had some kids who do actually throw up in the work that we do. It really does make them uncomfortable, but they have to have that buy-in, because otherwise it's not worth it. And if they've got that buy-in, then they've got a little bit of confidence. So they need to be willing to face whatever it is that they're anxious about. That's got to be stronger than the anxiety itself. Otherwise, we're really not going to get anywhere. It's just going to be us trying to convince them. Now, part of the buy-in is to ensure that they understand anxiety, which is earlier on, right, in the compass, but also understanding how the brain works so they can become an expert on their own brain. And so being able to talk about what their brain is doing and how that anxiety shows up for them, and that we can change our brain. 1 hour of practicing anything that we do doubles the bundles of neurons in our brain. So if we practice math for an hour or an instrument for an hour, we are doubling that bundle in our brain. So we can create new networks and new pathways. That is essentially what we're doing in managing anxiety. It's not about breathing. It's not about relaxation strategies and meditation. That can help bring our baseline down, but they're not effective anxiety strategies. We are not rewiring the brain when we breathe. Breathing just keeps us alive. It's really good to be breathing. We should all be breathing deeply, right? So to do this work, to be really effective, we're actually changing our brain. And so that's going to be really important for kids to know. I also like to focus on what's important to kids. Sometimes being able to have a successful sleepover without mommy or daddy picking them up is motivation enough. That's really important. Feeling like they're not babies, sometimes for them, that's motivation enough. But I got to tell you, so I've got a teenage girl in grade 9. I can bribe, well, I say bribe, but I can motivate her to face any fear with an episode of Grey's Anatomy. And if I throw in some nibs in there with it, it's miraculous what she's willing to do and what fears she's willing to face. She's got a lot of social anxiety. And so it's okay if it's a Grey's Anatomy and some licorice. That's okay if that's important too. Whatever it is that we're going to have that buy-in. Once we have their buy-in, then we can externalize it. Anxiety can be really overwhelming and it just takes over everything. We get sucked into all the stories and all the thoughts or the feelings that we have, and we get tangled up into this huge knot. And it's not a far jump from having a thought to believing the thought. And that's what ends up happening. And especially for kids as they get into tween and teenage years, they end up having really dark, twisted thoughts. They start thinking about existential matters. They start thinking about death. They start thinking about even suicidality. And all of that is quite common. right? It's common for kids to be, if they're driving down a bit busy highway that's kind of turning, they're like, what if I just smash into that wall? It's not that they are suicidal. Our brain just does all these funky things, and we're not talking about it enough. I've got one kiddo who will go and play video games, one of those shoot 'em up, you know, I won't even get into some of the things that end up happening on that video game, but it's quite sexually exploitive and all of these other things. But he'll play them, but he's so sensitive, he will go and then think about doing those things to his family members. That's common. That's a boy thing. That's a teenage thing, right? We just don't talk about it enough. So then kids start believing, because I had this thought, it's actually going to happen. I'm psychotic, I'm a murderer, something's wrong with me. Or I had the thought that mom and dad are in an accident, so therefore it probably did happen. We start getting sucked in. So we got to disentangle ourselves. So the easy thing, and I do this with kids as well as my adults, we externalize it. We give it a name. If we could pull that amygdala out of our brain, which we can't do, but if we could give it a name, it's kind of the trickster part of our brain. What would we call it? What would it look like? And I get them to draw it and talk about it, even my adults, right? So that we can start saying, okay, when Jeannie shows up, what is she saying? How is she making you feel? Because then we feel like it's not us, that something's wrong with us. Now we know it's our trickster part of our brain. I like Gremlins. And the reason I like Gremlins is because, they start cute and cuddly, like little gizmo over here. But when we feed them at the wrong time, they turn into these nasty creatures here, like the gremlins, right? And so, and they're tricksters. Yeah, this looks really scary, but they're kind of like, they're mischievous. They'll go and photocopy their butts, right? And so kids kind of get a laugh out of that. If this is too scary, I like to think of different stories. So minions are mischievous. They can be helpful in some ways, just like our amygdala, but in other ways, they can kind of get up to no good and cause problems. In How to Train Your Dragon, right? Everyone wanted to get rid of the dragons. They thought they were bad, trying to get rid of them. But Hiccup came along and said, hey, we can tame them. And if we can tame them, we can use them to our advantage. That's kind of what we're doing here. We're taming our amygdala. We are taking control of our amygdala, so it's not, causing all sorts of problem. So once we've named it, we can expose it for what it is, right? Just like the gremlins who hated the third rule. If you didn't know what the 3 rules of gremlins is, don't get them wet, don't feed them after midnight, and the third one is don't expose them to light. And that's what anxiety doesn't want you to do. It wants to suck everybody in, kind of like a cult. You don't even realize you're part of this cult. Sucks us in, and then we're not aware of what's going on. Oh my goodness, you're sick, you better stay home from school today, right? We got to expose it for what it is. Of course you feel sick. This is all the stuff that's happening in your body. Your food is just sitting there undigested and there's acid in your tummy because you're nervous, right? Of course that's what's happening. Oh, Bob's really trying to, I shouldn't use Bob, sorry. That's usually the name that some of my kiddos actually like for their anxiety. But wow, your amygdala, your trickster amygdala is really trying to freak you out today and scare you today. Wow, that's a really big story. So that's kind of how we start exposing it. The acceptance piece, I am going to talk about it in a little bit. A lot of these pieces are actually quite entwined. And so you're going to see that. Part of accepting goes straight into detaching. So accepting that anxiety is normal. Anxiety is here to stay, right? It's part of who I am. And to be honest, we cannot turn down that anxiety dial. We have no control over that anxiety dial. Our amygdala is the fastest, strongest part of our brain. It's always going to take over, especially in the face of danger. What we do have control is our willingness dial, our willingness to still go to school, even though I'm scared, to still go outside, even though I'm terrified I'm going to catch COVID, to still do these things. I'm willing to live my life and not stay at home, because our brain really is built to be sad and like depressed and anxious. Because if we're depressed and anxious, we'll stay in bed. There's no point of getting out of bed, right? And if we're in bed, guess what? There's no danger. We're going to be kept safe. So of course our brain always wants us to go there, but we got to be willing to do something different, even if we don't feel like it. And so part of that acceptance is detaching. Now we've exposed anxiety. Yep, that's what it makes you feel like. Those are the stories it says. We need to be able to detach from it. So our thoughts are not trustworthy. We need to teach kids this in experiential ways. So we can make a list of things that people believed that we don't believe anymore. So for example, there was a time when people believed the earth was flat, and literally if you walked off the edge, you would fall into outer space, which I think would be amazing. But people believe that. Just because they believed it didn't mean it's true. And apparently some people are believing it. Would love to hear from everyone. Okay, what did you learn? How long does it take for gum to digest if you swallow it? What did you guys learn? You can type it in the chat box. 7 years. That's what I learned. Anyone else learn? Forever. Yeah, those are usually the two common ones. 7 years, that's what I learned, or forever. But it's just like anything else. It's no more than a week. How much of our brain do you think we use? Any takers, guessers? This is anxiety. Nobody wants to actually put in I guess, be wrong. 10%. Yeah, 10%. Hollywood wants us to believe it's 10%. And so we've got all of these humans with superpowers, metahumans who can fly or incredible strength or whatever, because they are tapping into all parts of their brain. But guess what, guys? We're using all of our brain. We pretty much use all of it. It's not just 10%. What did you guys learn? Oh, there's always someone who ruins this for me, but what did you guys learn about camels' humps? What's in camels' humps? Water. Yeah. I remember in grade 5, my teacher in grade 5 took us to the zoo and told us water is in camels' humps, but it's actually fat. So just because we're taught something, just because we believe something doesn't mean it's true. Do you think our brains got bigger or smaller or stayed the same since 10,000 years ago? Anyone? The same, bigger, same, bigger, smaller. Our brains are actually shrinking. Our brains have been shrinking over 10,000 years. We'd like to think that toilets are pretty germy, and I'm talking public toilets. I would definitely rather, not touch a public toilet if I didn't have to. But guess what? Our cell phones have 10 times more germs than public toilets, right? So just because we might intuitively think something, our thoughts are not trustworthy. So we can do things like that and show kids, I believed this for so long, right? And I can't believe, just because we thought it doesn't mean it's actually true. We can also do, I took them out just for sake of time, but optical illusions. So just like our thoughts can trick our brain, our eyes can trick our brains too. And so I will do lots of optical illusions with kiddos just so that they can see that first thought that pops into our brain is the first draft. It's a conspiracy theory, right? That's essentially what it is. So as soon as, oh my goodness, mom and dad are late, the first story, the first draft is always going to be the scariest. They're dead. Okay, so what are 10 other options? Because, just like the first draft, there's lots of reiterations. Well, maybe they got stuck in traffic. Maybe they stopped at Dairy Queen. That's what we do. Me and my husband just stopped at Dairy Queen and got a blizzard or something like that. Most of the time, that first draft is wrong, 99% of our time. So we can start looking for these conspiracy theories that our kiddos have and start saying, was it accurate? Let's be a detective. Let's write that conspiracy theory down. And then we'll do a hypothesis, right? And then was it actually accurate? Was it confirmed? So those are a couple of things that we can do. Now, in your own heads, and actually, if you want to type it, you can. Finish these sayings. So once upon a time, probably. Yeah. There's no place like home. Yeah. Blondes have more fun. You got it. So think about why did you think of those? These are ingrained pathways in our brain, right? They're ingrained. And so these are the kinds of pathways that we need to start attacking. Now, it's all about language. I'm not going to get into the whole language piece, but we attach words to things, and those words have a lot of emotional value to them. Now, here's the thing. Our brain works in addition, not subtraction. So what I mean by that is we will never unlearn these things. They are in there. We can learn them, but we can't unlearn them unless we, have dementia or something else that's going on, degenerative, I can't talk today, brain difficulties, right? That will make us forget, but our brain works in addition. So that's the same sort of thing with, when we're working with anxiety, but we got to know they're just words. We create stories then. So once upon a time, that's pretty universal for all of us, but we also have our own stories. I hate my, you fill in the blank. I'm terrified of, you fill in the blank. And we've created our own stories, but it's just a word. So I had one kiddo who, for example, was scared of murdering his family. He wouldn't even say, he's like the M word, right? Because he'd have these thoughts and he thought that he was terrible. It's just a word, and it dragged him down and it held so much weight on him. So for 20 seconds, I want you guys to, you can probably get the sense of milk. Even if you don't drink milk, maybe you drink soy milk or coconut milk or something like that. Get the sense of milk, right? The creaminess. You can probably have a really good feel of what milk is. That's the power of language. But for 20 seconds, I want you to repeat the word milk over and over and over again until I say stop. So start now. Milk, 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 as fast as you can. Milk, 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 milk. Do it with me. Milk, 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 milk. Milk, 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 faster. Milk, 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 milk. Okay, that's good. What happens to it? It becomes meaningless. So that's kind of what we need to do with language. And so with my kiddo, with murder, I'd have him say murder over and over. Murder, 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 murder. Failure, 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 failure. Whatever it is that we're really struggling with, right? Awkward, 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 awkward. Saying it over and over. Demoting that language a little bit, because that one word has so much power over us. So the feelings are still there. The thoughts are still there. We're changing how we respond to it. And that's detaching. We're getting untangled from some of those stories. And so that's an example of the detaching. Or we can just make fun of it. We can draw cartoons. We can mute it. We can say it really fast. Or I love using a Mickey Mouse. I'm going to murder my family. I mean, kids start laughing because they see the ridiculousness of it, right? So we're just kind of bringing that anxiety down a little bit so that there's not so much power over top of them. Oh my gosh, that's the hate story, that everyone's going to hate me. It's such a boring story. Amygdala, you tell me that all the time. So it's just being able to change kids' reactions to it. They're still going to have the thoughts, they're still going to have the feelings, but they're not getting sucked in and dragged, away with them. So that's kind of the purpose of detaching. These are my girls, much, much younger than they actually are now, but hiking, they were always terrified of hiking because their prankster mom was always like, cougar, bear, right? Freaking them out. So they got to the point of they were terrified of going for hikes. One thing that anxiety wants us to do is it's kind of this narrow sort of focus where we're only focused on the things that are freaking us out. And so then they're missing their entire hike. So we're being able to zoom out. So rather than being on the lookout for a bear, I had them be on the lookout for really cool things on our hike. So we're acknowledging the worries that we have. And then we're going to be, I'm going to focus my attention elsewhere, because anxiety only wants us to look in this one sort of narrow place. So if we have separation anxiety, we're always focused on saying goodbye and one more hug and one more kiss. What are we looking forward to? I'm looking forward to going into school and I've got my special job that I can, feed the fish. Or I'm looking forward to when I can see you at the end of the day, right? So we can just start shifting a little bit. Sometimes we get stuck. I love doing bounce backs. Where you can pretend that you're the worried thought. And so maybe you've got a kiddo who's worried about putting his hand up in class because kids are going to laugh at him, right? And so he'll bounce the ball, or you'll bounce the ball as the worried thought and be like, you can't answer any questions because you don't know anything. And so the child has to bounce back. It's almost like a rebuttal. Why? No, actually, I'm quite confident. I learned that. I know exactly who our prime minister is, for example, right? But you're going to bounce back, well, but you might mess up and kids are going to laugh at you. And then they can bounce, well, no, Johnny said something ridiculous the other day and nobody laughed at him, right? And so everything that we are trying to tell our kids to reassure, they are coming up with those reassurances themselves. That's what we need to get them to, where they are coaching themselves. They are telling themselves everything's going to be okay. I'm going to skip over a few things here because I have 5 minutes left to talk about the most important part. Anxiety wants us to avoid things that we're worried about because it can be dangerous. And so that brings us to this dare and defy. 90% of what kids learn, it's through experience, not us telling them, it's through their own experience. So the only way to overcome this vicious cycle of anxiety is to go straight into the fire themselves and realize I can handle this situation. So we're creating opportunities. This is the stress inoculation. We're creating opportunities for them to go and face their fears. So it's not if anxiety shows up, it's when it shows up. What are you going to do? Right. And it's again, the anxiety dial might be turned up all the way. So it's being able to go into the situation, even if you are throwing up, even if that alarm is ringing so loud, you're feeling lightheaded, you're still going to go do it anyway. So what we're doing here is becoming better tolerators of anxiety because we can't take that amygdala out. There's always going to be time in different parts of our life where we're going to feel anxious. And so it's being able to create that opportunity. I've got this. Even though I feel really gross, I can still go do it. We're becoming better tolerators. That's what we need to do. That's kind of where we're going. And there's something to learn. Remember, I talked about the new wiring in our brain. There's something new that we need to learn. So it's only through experience we can talk about, you know what, you can go into the coffee house and get, nobody's going to kidnap you. We can tell them that, but they're never going to believe it. They have to go and experience it for themselves. So they need to learn, hey, talking to people I don't know is generally safe, right? And hey, I can manage whatever panicky feelings come up. I can manage all of that. And I did just have a kiddo the other day, actually, from my office. He went down, just a little guy, went down the stairs by himself to the first floor outside along the parking lot into the Waves coffee house to go get himself a cookie and coffee. We did lose him for a quick second. And so I kind of had a little panic attack. So I'm like, where did this little guy go? Because he just went the wrong way. But then he came back so confident and he had ordered his mom a coffee. And he's like, I did this. And I talked to someone I didn't know. And he was terrified of getting kidnapped because he had to walk along all the rows of cars. Just, you could see he was exuding confidence. Us telling him it was going to be okay wouldn't have made a difference. You have to go into it. So if you take nothing else away other than, so the one piece is responding, empathy, giving them space, right? Not falling into a parent trap. But the other piece is they have to face their fears. They have to activate their anxiety in their brain to change that part of their brain because they're never going to change it otherwise. And so we got to add a new story. They're not going to unlearn their kidnapping fear story, but we got to make a stronger connection, a stronger story that's going to contradict that, saying, you know what, I'm going to be okay. And we don't even necessarily know the associations our brain makes. I was bit by a dog when I was a baby. And quite severely, I had to go to the hospital. I didn't know that until I was older. So my entire life, I was terrified of dogs and had no idea why. Even though I had no conscious memories, my amygdala made that association that dogs are scary. So I still have that association, but I've got 2 dogs of my own now that I've learned new stories about dogs. Now I understand their body language, right? And so it's adding on to those stories that contradict. So that's what we do. So they got to face their fears without safety behaviors, without any safety blanket, essentially. And asking them, what's your prediction? What's the worst case scenario that could happen? And even if the worst case scenario happens, like sometimes I'll have kids go and ask someone, a stranger, the time, and they're scared that someone's going to be mean to them. And I've unfortunately had adults who were mean to them. So the worst case scenario did happen. But guess what? If it does happen, they handled it. And then they were like, well, screw you. Why are you being so mean? I was just asking you the time, right? And then they realized it was nothing to be scared about. So I think that that's really important when we start thinking about it. It's really kids getting that buy-in and wanting to start facing their fears and going and testing the accuracy of their predictions. And we have to create a lot of opportunities for them. So letting them, when they turn 8, to go fly to see grandparents, right? By themselves, trying different tools, going and experiencing new things. I know we're a little bit limited with COVID, but that's kind of an example. I had some video footage of me and my daughter, but I'm going to skip over that. Letting them pack their own bag, their own lunch, right? Letting them do something important. Over the holidays, I see so many parents who they'll let their kids help them decorate the tree, but then we're going and fixing it, right? Let them do the tree, and it doesn't matter what it looks like. We're going to love it anyway. Letting them take those risks. Use the big word in your writing, even if you don't know how to spell it, right? There's little things how anxiety can really show up. So it's really getting them to start doing their own things. If you want a cookie at Waves, cool. You got to order it though, right? You want pizza for dinner? Cool. You got to call up Pizza Hut and order it for the family. So I will end it there. The thrive piece is really just the maintenance, and the maintenance is kind of the pillars of good health anyways, right? So because life is up and down. So we got to have good pillars. Being able to document. Worry makes us forget. So we want to document our past successes. So when you are brave, so that kiddo who went to Waves Coffee and got his own cookie, we were writing that down in a bravery journal. Or you can have a bravery jar with gems where you can see, look at how brave and he's seeing his progress with the bravery. So doing those kinds of things is going to be really important. And then of course, just having a healthy lifestyle is always important, which is just good for everybody. Now, one thing I will say though, I talked earlier about how how our amygdala, we have no control over that dial. There is one thing where we can actually calm that amygdala down, and that's exercise. And so if we think about it, if you've hit your head or you stub your toe, the first response is usually swear, right? So when we get scared, it's our pain part of our brain that ends up getting triggered. And so what we need to do is to be able to once our brain is triggered, we've got all of this energy revved up in our system because all of the blood is rushing to our big muscles to fight or to run away. And so exercise can help relieve some of that pressure. And so that's the one thing. If a kiddo's starting to get anxious, doing some jumping jacks or going for a quick bike around the block or whatever else, those are things because our body is revved up. So we need to be able to get rid of that energy in productive ways. Unfortunately, they usually get it smashed down and it lashes out in behaviors. Diet and social connection, all of those things are really important. Having just reminiscing, go through old videos and photo albums with your kid because that can help start eliciting some of these positive things. One last word, I know I'm a few minutes over, but I know I talked a lot about the importance of being a good role model, but truly until they hit teenage years, and teenage years is a whole ball of wax in and of itself. And I've got teenagers, and so it's really working through this. But generally speaking, if you're doing good as a parent, your kids are probably doing pretty good too. And so it's looking upon ourselves, and that's part of the understanding piece as well. I talk a lot about parent self-care and us being able to do good and being able to practice our own amygdala detaching and bravery and doing things that worry us. So I wanted to end on that note there. Thank you for joining me. I know it was fast and furious. I do have a masterclass where I go through each of these in great detail with strategies and things in each one, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have for now. And if we don't get to them all, you can always email me as well.
Thank you, Dr. Buzanko. I just posted in the chat area a link to your website, and there's lots of great resources there. Time for you just to take a deep breath. You have shared a lot of content with us. It has been so rich. I have one question for you that came from the chat area. The question was, when is it time to consult with a professional when we're concerned about the anxiety level in our children?
Yeah, well, if you're asking the question, it's probably good now too. Generally speaking, if we're not doing anything actively about it and not sure how, I mean, some kiddos I see one session, that's all it takes, really. As long as you feel, some parents can do it. If you have a solid understanding of what anxiety is, how it shows up, how you can respond effectively without enabling the anxiety or anything like that, then, and you think that you're managing and your child's open to trying new things and you're not seeing avoidant behaviors and it's not interfering with life, then that's okay. But as soon as it is starting to interfere, we're seeing avoidant behaviors, giving up really easily. It can show up in really subtle ways, right? They start working on a math problem or a writing task and they give up, I can't do it, and they need a lot of prompting. It might be time just to make sure you've got some great strategies under your belt.
Okay, thank you. You introduced an interesting term that I hadn't heard before about lawnmower parents. We're familiar with helicopter parents, but that's the first time I've heard about lawnmower parents. And you introduced, again, the reminder to us that stress is not bad. It's a part of life, and it's how we grow, actually. I wonder if you might lean into the idea of what is the difference between stress and distress? How can we see that in children?
Yeah. Well, and even I talk a lot about misbehavior versus stress behavior, and it's the same sort of thing. So, I mean, stress is normal, and that's where we can start differentiating between what's normal versus the distress kind of falls into we have a serious problem over here. Stress, if we think developmentally, normal experience of stress when kiddos are separating from their parents for the first time to go to preschool or kindergarten, for example, that's fairly normal. Switching schools, going from elementary to junior high, high school is lots of stress with school and different expectations. So when we look developmentally, there are appropriate stressors where we're managing that stress. It becomes a problem, though, when you've got someone in grade 12 who still has a lot of separation anxiety and calling mom or texting mom all the time. Where are you? What time are you going to be home? And it starts, we start seeing these behaviors seeping in that's above and beyond what we would expect of a kiddo this age. And so I'm not sure exactly if I'm answering, but some of the things too we need to look at, and I didn't talk about this just because there wasn't enough time, is the environment. It's not just about the one child. I did talk about how it's a family affair, but we got to look at the bigger environment as well, right? And so that creates a lot more of the distress. And so sometimes it's about what do we need to do out here first? So if we're putting a kiddo, and I work with a lot of kiddos, unfortunately, who are in really volatile homes, right? So there's I'm not going to work on the kids' anxiety management if I'm throwing them back into a fire, distressing sort of situation, or we're not going to throw them in, at school if there's major bullying happening. So there's other things sometimes that we need to ensure that we're not traumatizing our kids either. So it's finding that balance. I don't know if that's kind of getting at what was asked, but.
Yes, no, that was very helpful. Yes. Well, you have leaned into something that all of us care about. We care about our kids. And as parents, it's hard when we see our kids struggle. You have given us some really good tools to be able to move forward and perhaps go against, in a counterintuitive way, some of the things that we think might help that can actually hurt. And you've given us some really good insight into how we can truly help our children address the situations in their life and to be well. Again, Dr. Buzanko's website is in the chat area. Again, she has great resources there. And just posting as well a link to our National Hope Movement page. So again, I just want to thank you, Dr. Buzanko, for taking time from your day and sharing your skill set with us and helping parents be better, all those who work with children as well. And we do encourage you to check out our website. On that website, we will be posting this video. You can follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. You'll find all those links on our website. And in a few days, you'll receive a survey in your email. We would love to have your feedback, please. It will help us in future presentations. And you'll also receive a link to the recording of this workshop with Dr. Buzanko. And if you have any additional questions, there is the email address on our website. We would invite you just to reach out, be able to connect with us. And again, on behalf of all of us, Dr. Buzanko, thank you so much for sharing today, for being here. And thank to each of you for being a part of this presentation. Have a great week.
Thank you.